Before we get to the story, I'd like to say thanks so much for visiting my new channel. I'm going to be uploading cosmic horror-related stories every single day. So if that sounds good, please drop a like. And don't forget to subscribe. It means a lot, especially when just getting started. I hope you enjoy the story. I'm making this recording because someone needs to know. I understand that no one will believe me. I understand that the words I'm about to say will sound like fragments, like nonsense, like the ramblings of someone who spent too many hours alone in a dark room with headphones on. I understand that none of this will make sense. Not yet, but it will. That's how all the messages work. They only make sense after the ship sinks, after the building falls, after the president dies, after the towers collapse. The warnings are always there, buried in the recordings, waiting to be understood. But we never understand them in time. I'm recording this anyway, because maybe, just maybe, someone will listen before instead of after. Maybe this time will be different. I don't believe that, but I have to try. My name is Fletcher Goss. I work as an audio preservation technician for a company called Archival Solutions. We digitize old recordings for museums, libraries, universities, private collectors, anyone who has deteriorating media they want to save before it's lost forever. Wax cylinders from the turn of the century, vinyl records from the Jazz Age, reel-to-reel tapes from mid-century radio stations, cassettes full of family memories, old digital formats that modern equipment can't read anymore. My job is to capture these sounds before they fade into silence, to save voices that would otherwise be lost, to preserve history, one recording at a time. I've been doing this for 8 years. I've processed thousands of recordings, mostly mundane stuff. Grandparents telling stories to grandchildren, amateur musicians practicing in garages, corporate meetings that no one will ever listen to again. The ordinary sounds of ordinary lives frozen in time. Occasionally, I find something interesting. A famous voice before they were famous. A historical event captured by accident. A glimpse into a world that doesn't exist anymore. I've learned to listen carefully, to hear things that aren't obvious on first pass, to notice the details buried under the surface noise. I never expected to find what I found. It started 3 weeks ago with a collection of reel-to-reel tapes from a university archive. Routine job. Lectures from the 1970s, recorded for posterity by a professor who thought his words were worth preserving. Maybe they were. I wasn't being paid to judge. I was processing a tape from 1974. Philosophy lecture, something about epistemology and the nature of knowledge. The professor had a droning voice that made my eyes heavy. I was running on autopilot, monitoring the levels, making sure the capture was clean. Then I heard it. During a pause in the lecture, in the gap between one sentence and the next, there was another voice, whispering, so quiet I almost missed it, buried under the hiss of the tape at a frequency just barely within human hearing. If I hadn't been wearing good headphones, if I hadn't been paying close attention, I never would have noticed. I stopped the capture, rewound, listened again. The whisper was there, definitely there. Not part of the lecture, something else entirely. I isolated the frequency range, amplified it, ran it through noise reduction to clean away the interference. The whisper became words. A building collapsing, people screaming, a specific city, a specific date. April 19th, 1995. I looked up the date. My hands were shaking as I typed. The results came up instantly. A federal building in a major city destroyed by a bombing. 168 people dead. One of the worst domestic terrorist attacks in American history. The recording I was listening to was made in 1974, 21 years before the event. I sat in my workroom for a long time after that, staring at my equipment, trying to make sense of what I'd heard. There had to be an explanation. Contamination from another recording, some kind of audio artifact that my brain was interpreting as words. Pareidolia, the tendency to perceive patterns where none exist. But I listened again, and again, and again. The words were clear, the details were specific, the date was exact, and there was no possible way anyone in 1974 could have known what was going to happen in 1995. I found Mira in the video processing room and told her what I'd discovered. I expected confusion, maybe concern, maybe a gentle suggestion that I take some time off. Instead, her face went pale. "You need to talk to Gordon," she said. "Right now." I asked why. "Just go," she said. "And don't tell anyone else about this. Not yet." Gordon Trimble founded Archival Solutions over 40 years ago. He was in his 70s now, mostly retired, but he still came into the office every day. I always assumed he just couldn't let go of the business he'd built. Couldn't stand to be away from the work that had defined his life. I was wrong about that. When I told Gordon what I'd found, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he got up, closed his office door, and locked it. "How many have you found?" he asked. I told him just one. He laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. "I've found hundreds." He took me to a part of the building I'd never seen before. A storage room behind a storage room, climate-controlled, lined with shelves from floor to ceiling. On those shelves were recordings, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Wax cylinders in protective cases, vinyl discs in acid-free sleeves, reel-to-reel tapes in metal canisters, cassettes in plastic boxes, CDs and hard drives and formats I didn't even recognize. Every recording medium humanity has ever invented was represented in that room, and all of them, Gordon told me, contained hidden messages. "It started in 1983, he said. "I was digitizing a collection of 78 revolutions per minute records from a private estate. One of them was from 1938, a dance band, nothing special. But underneath the music, I heard something, a voice, whispering about fire falling from the sky, buildings burning, a city I recognized." He paused. The recording was describing a bombing raid. The date it mentioned was in 1943, 5 years after the record was made. Gordon had spent the next 40 years looking for more, pulling recordings from client collections before they were returned, scanning everything that came through his facility, building this archive in secret. Every format, he said, every decade, every type of recording. They're not on everything, maybe 1 in 10,000, but they're there, buried under the intended audio, hidden in the noise floor, encoded at the edges of human hearing. "What are they?" I asked. "Warnings," Gordon said. Descriptions of future events, disasters mostly, accidents, deaths, turning points. Someone, something, has been speaking through our recordings since we first learned to capture sound, and everything it says comes true. I asked the obvious question. If the recordings predict the future, why hasn't anyone used them to prevent disasters? Why hasn't anyone listened to the warnings and stopped the tragedies before they happened? Gordon's answer was simple and terrible. Because you can't understand what they're describing until after it happens, he explained. The words are there, clear as anything, but they don't make sense. They sound like nonsense, like random phrases, like fragments of meaning without context. The names don't connect to anything. The places sound unfamiliar. The events seem impossible until they happen. Then suddenly, everything clicks. The fragments become sentences. The nonsense becomes prophecy. The warning becomes history. But by then, it's too late. The ship has already sunk. The building has already fallen. The president is already dead. Every single recording in this room describes an event that has already occurred, Gordon said. I've verified all of them. Every whisper, every warning, every hidden message, all accurate, all describing real events that happened after the recordings were made. But you couldn't understand them until after. That's right. The warnings only become clear in hindsight. That's always been the rule. He paused. With one exception. I spent the next week in Gordon's archive. I listened to recording after recording, isolating the hidden frequencies, cleaning up the buried voices, hearing whispers from across a century of captured sound, a wax cylinder from 1903, describing a massive ship striking ice and sinking in the North Atlantic. The details matched a famous disaster, down to the number of lifeboats and the temperature of the water. But the recording was made 9 years before that ship was even built. A vinyl disc from 1929, whispering about a market collapsing, fortunes evaporating, men jumping from buildings, recorded months before the crash that started the Great Depression. A reel-to-reel tape from 1962, murmuring about a president in an open car, a grassy knoll, a city in Texas, made more than a year before the assassination. A cassette from 1999, describing planes hitting towers, fire and collapse. A date in September that would become infamous, recorded 2 years before the attacks. All of them accurate, all of them specific, all of them impossible to understand until after the events they described. The hidden voices were all the same. Not the same literal voice, but the same presence, the same quality. Something ancient speaking through technology it didn't create. Something that exists outside of time or perceives a time differently than we do. Gordon had spent decades trying to understand what it was. I don't think it's human, he said. Don't think it's anything we have a name for. I believe it exists in the spaces between moments, in the gap between cause and effect. It sees everything that will happen because, from its perspective, it already has happened. Like it exists outside of time? Not outside, beside, parallel. It perceives time the way we perceive space. We can see an entire landscape at once, take it all in with a glance. This thing sees an entire timeline the same way. Past, present, future. All visible at once. All equally real. Then why can't it warn us properly? Why can't it tell us things we can actually understand and act on? Gordon was quiet for a moment. Imagine trying to warn an ant about a flood, he said finally. You'd want to help. You genuinely want to save that ant's life. But you don't speak ant. You don't think like an ant. Your perception of reality is so different from the ant's that any warning you tried to give would be meaningless. The ant would hear something, but it wouldn't understand. It couldn't understand. The gap between you is too vast. He looked at me with tired eyes. We're the ants, Fletcher. This thing is trying to warn us. It's been trying for over a century. But it doesn't understand how we experience time. It doesn't realize that a warning only matters if it comes before the disaster in a way we can comprehend. It speaks and we hear, but we can't understand until it's too late. So it's not malicious. No, I think it genuinely wants to help. I think it's been desperately trying to save us over and over for as long as we've been able to record sound. And it's failed every single time, not because it doesn't care, because it doesn't know how to reach us. The tragedy of it hit me then. Something vast and unknowable, watching disasters approach, screaming warnings into every recording it could reach, and never once being understood in time. A century of desperate, futile prophecy. A century of warnings that only made sense too late. Among all the recordings in Gordon's collection, there was one that was different. A cassette tape, recorded in 1987. Standard format, nothing special about the physical medium. But the hidden message on this one wasn't like the others. It was longer, more detailed, more urgent. The voice, that same impossible voice I'd heard on dozens of recordings now, sounded different on this one. More desperate, more afraid, like it knew this was the message that mattered most. I listened to it dozens of times, trying to parse the fragments, trying to make sense of the whispered words. Like all the others, it sounded like nonsense at first. Phrases that didn't connect. Names that meant nothing. Events that seemed impossible. But certain things were clear. A date, specific enough to identify. Less than a year away. A scope, not a local disaster. Not a regional catastrophe. Not even a national tragedy. Something global. And an ending. Not an ending of something. The ending, final, complete, total. The voice was more desperate on this recording than any other in Gordon's collection. The whispers were faster, more urgent, layered over each other like someone trying to cram as much information as possible into a limited space. Whatever this event was, the thing in the recordings knew it was coming, had known since 1987, had been trying to warn us for almost 40 years, and like every other warning, it wouldn't make sense until it was happening. I have known about this recording since I found it in 1989, Gordon said. I've spent 35 years trying to decode it, trying to understand exactly what's coming, trying to find some way to act on the warning. And I've failed, just like every other attempt to use these recordings has failed. The words are there, but they don't connect to anything I can recognize. The event is too large, too unprecedented, too outside my frame of reference. I can't understand what's being described. But when it happens, everything will click. Every fragment will suddenly make perfect sense. I'll understand exactly what the voice was trying to tell me. His voice was bitter. And it won't matter, because it will already be happening, and there won't be anything left to save. I asked why he'd never told anyone, never gone public with the recordings, never tried to warn the world. Who would believe me? Gordon asked. And even if they did, what could they do? You can't stop something you don't understand. You can't prepare for something you can't see coming. He gestured at the archive around us, shelves full of warnings, a century of prophecy. I've spent 40 years listening to disasters before they happened, watching the news and recognizing events I'd heard whispered about months or years before, knowing that the warnings were there, that they were accurate, that they could have saved lives if only someone had understood them in time. He looked at me with eyes that had seen too much. Do you know what that does to a person? Knowing that something is trying to save us and failing over and over because we simply can't understand each other. It's not malice. It's not indifference. It's something much worse. What? Incompatibility. We're just not built to receive what it's trying to send. Our minds don't work the way its mind works. Time doesn't flow for us the way it flows for it. The warnings are real, they're sincere, they're desperate, and they're fundamentally useless. He sat down heavily in a chair, surrounded by recordings of future catastrophes. The entity wants to save us. We want to be saved, and neither of us can bridge the gap. That's the horror of it, Fletcher. That's what keeps me up at night. Not the disasters themselves. The knowledge that help was always available, always reaching out, always trying to connect. And we could never, ever grasp it in time. I couldn't accept Gordon's resignation. I understood his despair. After 40 years of useless prophecy, anyone would give up hope. But I couldn't just sit and wait for whatever was coming. So I decided to make my own recording. Not because I think it will help. I know it probably won't. The same rules that applied to all the other warnings will apply to mine. The words will sound like fragments. The meaning won't be clear until it's too late. But the entity has been trying to warn us for over a century. Something has been speaking through our recordings, desperately trying to save us, failing every time through no fault of its own. Someone should acknowledge that. Someone should try to listen before instead of after, even if it's hopeless. So here's what I know. There are recordings, hundreds of them, hidden in the archives of archival solutions, hidden in collections all over the world, hidden in every format humanity has ever used to capture sound. They contain warnings, whispers at the edge of hearing, voices that describe events before they happen. Something is speaking through our technology, something that perceives time differently than we do, something that sees the future as clearly as we see the present. It's been trying to warn us since the 1870s, since the very first recording was made. Every disaster, every tragedy, every turning point in history, it tried to tell us. It failed every time. Not because it didn't care, because we couldn't understand. And now the biggest warning of all is almost due. The recording from 1987, the desperate voice. The fragments I can't quite pass. The date is less than a year away. The scope is global. The ending is final. I don't know exactly what's coming. I won't know until it arrives. That's how it always works. That's how it will always work. But when it does, when everything finally makes sense, remember this recording. Remember that someone tried to tell you. Remember that something tried to warn you. Remember that warnings only matter if you can understand them in time. We never could. We never will. As I'm making this recording, I notice something strange. There's a sound underneath my voice, a whisper I didn't put there, at the edge of hearing, buried in the noise floor of my own equipment. I stop talking and listen. It's there, the voice, the same presence I've heard on 100 other recordings, speaking through my microphone, my software, my technology, adding its own message to mine. I try to isolate it, try to amplify it, try to understand what it's saying. I can't. The words are there, but they don't connect to anything I recognize. The fragments don't form sentences I can pass. The warning is real. I can feel its urgency, but I can't understand it. I won't be able to understand it until it's too late. That's how it always works. My recording is now part of the pattern, another warning that will only make sense in hindsight, another desperate attempt to bridge the gap between what's coming and what we can comprehend. I've become part of the thing I'm trying to fight. And somewhere in the static of my own voice, something ancient and desperate is still trying to warn us, still failing, still hoping that maybe, just this once, someone will understand, before instead of after. I'm going to finish this recording now. I'm going to save it and copy it and spread it as far as I can. I know it won't help. I know the words will sound like nonsense until the day arrives. I know that by the time anyone understands what I'm trying to say, it will be too late to do anything. But I want someone to know. I want someone to hear this and remember when the time comes that the warnings were there, that something was trying to save us, that we were never alone in our march toward disaster. Listen to the old recordings, the wax cylinders, the vinyl, the tapes, the files. Listen to the space beneath the sound, the whispers in the static, the voices at the edge of hearing. Something has been trying to warn us for over a century. It's still trying, and the biggest warning of all is almost here. I don't know exactly what's coming. I won't know until it arrives. But when it does, when everything finally makes sense, when the fragments click into place and the prophecy becomes history, remember this recording. Remember that this recording will only make sense after it's too late. Remember that it was always going to be too late. And remember that something out there, something vast and strange and utterly different from us, tried its best to save us anyway. That's the tragedy of it. That's the horror. We're drowning in prophecy, and none of it can save us. Because the gap between warning and understanding is the width of a moment, and we're always on the wrong side. This audio file was discovered on a server belonging to Archival Solutions following the disappearance of an employee named Fletcher Goss. The company's founder, Gordon Trimble, was found deceased in his home 2 days later. Cause of death was listed as natural causes. The storage room described in the recording has not been located. Authorities who searched the facility found no evidence of any hidden archive. The recording has been analyzed by multiple audio experts. All have confirmed the presence of anomalous sounds beneath the primary vocal track. None have been able to isolate or identify these sounds. The date referenced in the recording as less than a year away has not yet arrived. This file has been flagged for monitoring. No further action has been recommended at this time. When asked for comment, a spokesperson for the agency reviewing the file stated only, "We are aware of the recording. We do not believe it represents a credible threat." The spokesperson declined to elaborate on what the recording might represent instead. In unrelated news, seismologists have noted unusual activity along several major fault lines. Atmospheric scientists have detected anomalies in global weather patterns. Astronomers have observed irregularities in the orbital paths of several near-Earth objects. None of these observations have been officially connected to each other or to any specific predicted event. The date mentioned in the recording is 11 months away. 10 months. 9. Listen to the static. Do you hear it? That whisper, just beneath the noise. It's still trying to warn you. It never stopped trying. It never will.